Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to a From Basic to Complete. Now, for this episode, we are doing Vetruvian. Two things, first off, Vetruvian's very expensive. Yeah, to the point when the half-completed list has 3 legendaries in it. Yeah, anyway, Vetruvian's very expensive, which means that, while this video does go over how you could potentially build it up from basics to a complete deck, I wouldn't recommend it. I would actually recommend trying out a different faction and then coming back to Vetruvian when you have enough cards to play with the half-completed list. As a result, the basic and Pauper lists are here for the sake of people that just really like the faction and just want to play that faction only, and as a result are not as well tested or thought through as they are for the other factions, because Vetruvian's not a good faction to start with. It just isn't. The other ones I've done so far, Lionar and Vanar, are much better to start with, and the two factions that I kind of agreed by everyone to not start with are Vetruvian and Magmar, because they involve so many legendaries. So with that out of the way, we will go on to the basic list. Now, funny considering what I just said, but Vetruvian actually can build a decent list of basics. This was shocking. For any of you that have watched my Vanar video for Basics to Complete will know how difficult it is to build a basic deck, because chances are you'll start getting some of the commons you need immediately. But most of the Vetruvian basics are playable. It's actually quite nice, since Cosmic Flesh was recently buffed. So, keeping that in mind, first thing we have for Vetruvian is their buffs, their basic buffs, Silence First Wish and Cosmic Flesh. Both of these are actually quite powerful. Now, Silence First Wish is the premium buff that's insane because it cantrips, and while straight draw isn't good in this game, cantripping is, especially considering the fact that it will often let you get massive tempo boost, because if you put a +1/+1 on a 2-drop, most of them are 2/3s, which means that you will trade up very easily. You can kill 2 of them. So +1/+1 is surprisingly useful. Also later on, it'll be going on things that can't be targeted by your opponent, and in the basic, it just is a good solid card. Now, note, if you put it on an obelisk, it only gives it +1 health because it's a structure and can't gain attack. Just random comment there. Same goes for Cosmic Flesh. Now, Cosmic Flesh was recently buffed and is now a very respectable buff. As far as the card goes, +1/+3 and Provoke is pretty handy, especially considering if you're playing basics, you don't have as much healing. So, yeah, the Cosmic Flesh is actually quite powerful. So anyway, Ephemeral Shroud, this is a substitution for Siphon Energy until you get them. Siphon Energy is way stronger, but Shroud is basic, so I would recommend switching them out as soon as you get them. Ethereal Obelisk, not the strongest 2-drop because it is so vulnerable to silence. However, it does summon 2/2s with Rush every turn. Now, you can't control where these summon, which does weaken it substantially, but it's still a pretty decent starter. It locks down areas of the board. Now, you can't just move away from it and limit its effectiveness, but the attack range on an obelisk is huge. If you put it in the middle of the board, 50% of the time, you're going to be able to hit them, because it will end up on the right side, and then you can just hit them easily. So never underestimate an obelisk. Make sure to play these either close to your opponent or not too far away. You can protect them with your hero, for instance, but don't play them too far away. Now, onto the solid 2-drops. We've got Healing Mystic, which is a very good 2-drop, the 2-mana 2/3. Then we've got the Pyromancer, which is quite powerful. Blast is a very useful mechanic that is specific to Vetruvian. Now, Pyromancer is going to be the backbone of 2-drops until we get to the actual final deck, and even then, a lot of decks play Pyromancer. It's just my particular version doesn't. But anyway, so Blast on 2-drop means it has to be answered. A lot of factions have issues with this. Not many cards do ping effects, which means they'll have to spend some actual removal on this, like Natural Selection, or have to silence it, which is not exactly a very good silence, because you're effectively just using a silence on a 2-drop, which no one wants to do. So Pyromancer can be very effective in that regard. Rock Pulverizer, yeah, you're a bit restricted on 2-drops when it comes to basics, so you might as well just go for the Ready Taunt. Now, strangely enough, you can actually Cosmic Flesh this for a 2/7, even though it already has Provoke. That body's still ridiculous, so that's worth thinking of. But Here, it's basically just here until you get either Primus Fist or Jaxi, which are both very, very superior to the Rock Pulverizer. Now, we do have a bit of a damage from hand package here, as we got the 3 Staff of Yakir for that 4 attack, lets you compete with some of the more powerful decks, and also allows you to rush down your opponent a little bit. A pretty powerful artifact. Then we've got the Silver Spine Tiger, which is your removal, because Vetruvian doesn't have much actual ranged removal, so the Tiger is doubly useful. 3 damage for 3 mana at range is pretty good, and the rush range is colossal, so take that for what you will. Then we've got Entropic. Entropic is a 3 of, very, very clunky, but you kind of need them to deal with some of the bigger stuff that the other decks will be throwing at you. It's pretty poor removal, but it's what you have in the faction, and it's kind of what you have to play with, which means that you kind of have to have your hero next to combat all the time, because otherwise you can't Entropic anything. 3 Hailstone Column, just normal. It's one of the solid 4-drops. We've got Wind Shrike, which is, again, not that solid, but 4 attack on a flying creature is okay. The draw card is close to useless, honestly. It doesn't do much. However, 4/3 for 4 flying is possible in this kind of deck. And then, as always, for basics, we've got 2 of the 5-drop Golem and 2 of the 6-drop Golem to offer some late game. But anyway, that's it for the basic. Then we go on to Pauper, where we can include some of the actual Vetruvian cards, the proper ones. So we still have some of the key basics, like Healing Mystic, for instance, which is basic, and that's amazing because it goes in everything. But then we've got 3 Siphon Energy, because 0 mana Silence is insane. You'd be amazed how much value you get out of a 0 mana Silence when you draw 2 cards a turn. And you've even got First Wish, which cantrips. So yeah, you have a lot more cards, and your Siphon Energies become insane. You can also just replace them if they're not very good, if you draw multiple. Now later on, and once you start getting a few more legendaries and things like that, this ends up going down to a 2 of, if I recall. In some metagames it's still warranted as a 3 of. But the point is that you're looking for as much power in each card as you can, and Siphon Energy is one of the best dispels in the game. Debatably the best, along with Chromatic Cold and Sunbloom. Those are the 3. Basically, Siphon Energy is free, but has to target the minion and can only do 1. Sunbloom is AoE, and Chromatic Cold is 2 damage removal and can also target Mechazor. That's basically the argument between those 3. Anyway, on to the other upgrades. We've got, well, the 3 ofs on both the Jaxi and Primus Fist. Now, I have gone over these before, but I'll quickly reiterate. They're both powerhouses at common, and they're both very, very powerful. Jaxi is essentially a 3/3 for 2, and he's probably better than a 3/3 for 2, because a 3/3 for 2 would deal 6 damage, maybe, or trade for a 2-drop and deal 3 damage to the hero. Jaxi deals 2 damage to the hero, or trades with something and your hero into that 2-drop, and then leaves behind the 1/1 with range. Now, this 1/1 with range will be an absolute nightmare if it ends up on the wrong side of the field for your opponent. And it's very hard to deal with, and will usually deal 2 to 3 damage per game on its own, and is just miserable to deal with. And it also works very, very well with Primus Fist, because then it starts doing 2 damage, and then it can legitimately kill things. Primus Fist, 2/3, lets you buff up your other 2/3s to kill their 2-drops, which is pretty big, because it means you can get a lot of tempo in that regard, because the hero can only attack 1 thing per turn, so if you get multiple low HP creatures out, guess what, you can't deal with all of them. So the Pyromancer and the Staff and the Tiger, these are all very, very critical cards when you're on a budget. Down 1 Entropic, because as I said, it's a bit clunky, but you still have to run them to kind of deal with some of the larger stuff. Now, the end of the curve is where we see a bit of upgrading here. We've got 2 Dancing Blades and 2 Death Blighters. This is something which I've been doing in all of my Pauper decks recently, because they're both insane. Basically, between the 2 of them, they let you drop 3 damage on things on curve. So with Dancing Blades, you get a bigger body, and you get to nuke 1 guy. Watch the positioning, it can actually hit your own stuff. Keep in mind that forward facing is always away from your starting side. And then we've got the 2 Death Blighter, higher mana, not as good stat wise, but it can AoE your opponent, and we don't have any AoE, so Death Blighter automatically becomes quite powerful. Now later on you've got Third Wish, but for now you don't. Now, the last card in the deck is Starfire Scarab, the power common, which for anyone that has played Gauntlet recently will know will win games on its own sometimes. Now, in Constructed, this usually gets silenced or killed. But then they kill it, and it's hard removal on a 5-drop, which isn't that bad. And if it's silenced, you still have a 4/7. You only lose the 2 stats from the Golem. So Scarab is pretty much, well, strictly better than the 4/9 that you would normally be playing. Blast is an incredibly powerful mechanic, especially on higher attack creatures. On Pyromancer, it's pretty innocuous, but once it's on the Scarab, it starts hitting really hard. So watch this thing. So anyway, this is where the price of Vetruvian starts hitting quite hard, where we go into the half-completed list, with lots of rares and 3 legendaries. Yes, this is the half-completed list, which is worth about as much spirit as almost the fully completed lists I think I've done already. Yeah, Vetruvian's quite pricey, which is the reason it took me a while to get to it, even though people have been asking me to do Vetruvian for about 3 weeks, I think, 2 to 3 weeks at this point. But anyway, basically, yeah, when I was starting playing, people were like, oh, you're doing deck building, guys, do Vetruvian. I'm like, yeah, it's taken me a while to actually build these decks. But anyway, so this is where we start seeing a bit of a shift down. We've got 2 Siphon. As I said, power level goes up. You don't need as many Siphons. The early game is still exactly the same, although we are running 2 Staff. These will eventually disappear, but for now, they're still quite handy. Then we've got 2 Crossbones to deal with Mechazor mostly, because Vetruvian can't deal with Mechazor at all. Then we've got 2 Fireblaze Obelisk. Yes, I'm serious, it's actually decent. It works with Sand Howler, which is no joke, and it also is pretty annoying. Silence is on a pretty low point right now, not to mention if they silence your Obelisk, your 3rd wish will kill them. So, yeah, they have to actually handle the Obelisk, and it's not bad. It does get better with the completed version, but for now, it's a rare that's in the final deck, and it's pretty decent here. Still got the Tiger. Now, this is where Tiger comes into its own, because with 3rd wish, it gets a bit silly, because with 6 mana, you can deal 6 blast damage on Rush, which is nuts. Then we've got the other 3rd wish target, which is Sand Howler, because they can't target it. Now, I mentioned this earlier with 1st wish. Yeah, it also works with the 2-drop Dervish buff, which is the Doomcaster. However, that is reserved for the final deck when you actually have things like Rasha's Curse, because there aren't enough Dervishes in the deck, really, for the Doomcaster. So for the moment, we're still running the Pyromancer. But anyway, so it does work. The Dervish subtype is pretty important in this kind of deck. Now, what are these targets with? Yeah, 3rd wish. Arguably the most powerful single buff in the entire game. +3/+3 in Blast is ridiculous. It will actually win games on its own, and if you put this on a Sand Howler, unless they're Lionar or Vanar, they're dead. That usually happens. The reason for it is because Lionar and Vanar can silence a space. No one else can. Basically, they need to run the 2-drop with silence, because that can also silence a space. Vetruvian can't do anything. Songhai can't do anything. Songhai can race it, but that's about it. Magmar is completely screwed. They can't do anything to it whatsoever. You can leave it on the other side of the map and just do 6 damage a turn, blast everything they ever play. So Sand Howler 3rd wish is a game-winning condition right there, which is the reason why you craft 3rd wish first, and then you craft the other epics and legendaries, whereas with the other decks that I've been showing that are half-built, it's epics, and then you go on to the legendaries at the final. Nah, in the case of Vetruvian, you need the 3rd wish. You really do. You need the 3rd wish first. Finally, we've got, as far as upgrades goes, we've got the 3 Rejuvenator. This is the kind of card which is in every single deck, so it offers healing to classes that don't have healing. That's pretty much why it's in every deck. It's the same reason why Healing Mystic is in almost every deck. You need healing, and this is what you have at neutral. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about the Rejuvenator. The body is not fantastic. 4 mana 4/4 is below average, but it's not that much less than a Golem. It's 2 HP. It's not that much less, but the healing is really important. Besides that, cut a bit on the top end because, well, if you're running 3rd wish, the games are quicker, so you don't need as much on the high end of things. Still running the 2 Entropics, though, to deal with some of the more annoying things, since Vetruvian has serious issues with things just right in their face because they can't really handle it. Very difficult to burst through an Ironcliff Guardian, for instance, so Entropic helps with that. Now, if we move on to the completed list. Now, this is an interesting list. This is my version that I got to S-rank with this season, actually. Senelion, or Taka, depending on who you know him as, helped me out with this particular list. He was kind of joking about making a Dervish list, and it worked. So anyway, the upgrades from the previous list, we've got -3 Pyromancers and substituting them with Doomcasters. I mentioned earlier that you can use this with Sand Howler to get the buff on the Dervish, which is pretty substantial. This often happens where you third wish it, and Lionar will use Sunbloom on it. So then you just buff it again. That's a 5/5. So now they've used a Sunbloom and a Martyrdom on your 3-drop and third wish. So that's not exactly something they like doing, needless to say. Now, besides that, the early game is identical, and we've got 3 Rasha's Curse. This is the other reason you can actually play Doomcaster, because it summons a Dervish, which you can buff globally. So basically you have an airdrop rush 4/4 on a 2-card combo, which is pretty crazy. It also deals with things like Arclight Regalia and also the Sword and Abyssian that I can never remember the name of. Arclight Regalia is the big one though, and also Songhai runs quite a few artifacts. So Rasha's Curse actually is quite powerful at the moment in terms of its artifact destruction capabilities. You can also buy it back with Loremaster, which is fair. It's one of the other additions. Loremaster is not a 3-drop. Loremaster is a 6 or 7-drop most of the time, and it will be doing disgusting things like buying back third wishes. So you play third wish on your guy, play Loremaster, and then they have to deal with another third wish next turn, and this will often win the game. The other trick you can do with Loremaster is steal their stuff. You can do it to steal people's Sunblooms and then silence all of their Zeal guys. Stealing Chromatic Cold is particularly brutal, I've found, or Hailstone Prisoner works very, very well against Vanar, because Vanar only runs the best spells. They run Hailstone Prison, Chromatic Cold, and Aspect to the Mountain. All 3 are insane if you get to steal them, and especially with Aspect to the Mountain, they usually can't. They usually can't play a spell afterwards. But what are they going to play afterwards? A Hailstone Prison? Like, there aren't any bad spells to steal for a Loremaster against Vanar. So yeah, Loremaster is actually quite powerful right now. It's only a 2/of because he's very clunky. So I wouldn't recommend running more than 2. His stats are not fantastic. Unlike Crossbones, you can just kind of play him if you don't have any range creatures. Although Crossbones can also target mini Jaxes, but he's still a 3-mana 3/3. Loremaster is a 3-mana 3/1, which is pretty bad. So you really need to hold him for a spell. Still got the Obelisks. The Obelisks make a bit more sense now with the Rasha's Curse, because then you've got 3 rush damage on airdrop, which is a pretty big deal. And the last addition to the deck is Time Maelstrom. Now, this is a card that I was not sold on until I actually played with it. It's not necessary for the deck. You can just run 3 Rejuvenators instead, and then maybe 3 Fireblaze Obelisk or 3 Loremaster or something like that. But I'm running 2 Time Maelstrom. They get you out of situations no other card does, like being able to allow your general to move 2 extra spaces, which is reasonable. They also let you do really stupid turns that you wouldn't expect. Like, you can have a hand with 2 Time Maelstroms and just nothing else useful. Then you go Time Maelstrom, replace a card, draw 2, Time Maelstrom, replace a card. And then suddenly you've got Tiger, Third Wish, Tiger in your hand for lethal. It's weird how that works sometimes, because you go through your deck quite quickly in Duelist if you get the extra turns, so it just gets you out of impossible situations. You can also just replace them in the early game. That's what most of the time happens. And if you... This is an important distinction, actually. If you're playing with 3 Rejuvenators and you don't have Time Maelstrom, play the deck more aggressively. If you have Time Maelstrom in your deck and 2 Rejuvenators, play it more defensively, because you will get to Time Maelstrom and then you can get lethals out of nowhere. Whereas if you play it more aggressively, you don't need to get to the 9 mana turns or the turn after that to actually do something about this. So you can just win when you have 7 or 8 mana most of the time. Since the deck can close out the game very, very quickly, as I said, with Third Wish on a Sand Howler, or even on a Tiger, for instance. So anyway, that is the entire Vetruvian basic to complete. Now, I did give a bit of a warning that the deck is quite expensive. So we've got the 5 epics, 5 legendaries deck, which I think is the most expensive one I've done so far. But anyway, it is quite fun. It's very, very unique as a playstyle. It's very positioning based, especially once you have Third Wishes, because Blast is a very fun mechanic to play with. Not so much very fun to play against, because Blast doesn't retaliate Blast. This is something that does come up in Vetruvian Mirrors, and I wish they'd change. Because Blast doesn't retaliate against other Blast creatures, which means whoever attacks first wins. But as far as positioning goes, it is quite fun to play with. because you get to see which blast you can get, and you can often choose to go for 2 small creatures or 1 big one, and that kind of stuff is very dynamic and a lot more fun to play with. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, want to ask me any questions, put it in the comment section below. But as for now, it's been Jotto, signing off.